Clair Noto, the author of this legendary screenplay, is a bit of a mysterious figure. Not much about her appears to be solidly documented. From what I understand, she first entered the film industry in the mid-70s as an assistant sound editor, working on productions by famed producers Roger Corman and Bert Schneider. She made the move into writing in the late 70s, not through film, but rather through the world of comic books, penning issues of Red Sonja. Around that time, she began to break into Hollywood when she was hired by producing legend Ray Stark to write what I'm assuming was one of her first scripts, something she described as a female James Bond movie. It would appear that that film was never made, but pages of the script found their way to the desk of Sean Daniel, a producer who would later make his name with the Mummy franchise, then just beginning his career at Universal Studios. Daniel met with Noto and asked her what story she wanted to tell. Noto told him about The Tourist, an idea that had been in her head for the last few years, and in 1980, he hired her to develop the project at Universal. The nucleus of the story had been formed when Noto first saw The Day the Earth Stood Still on television, and was struck by the simple idea of a man from space, an alien, who dons a suit and tie and is able to effortlessly walk amongst us Earthlings. Noto then evolved the idea in her own unique direction, taking inspiration for the surreal and sexualized tone from the photography of Helmut Newton and the artwork of, not so coincidentally, H.R. Giger. She described her ambitions thusly: "I wanted to create a science fiction movie for adults. I wanted to combine what I considered a serious dramatic story with the fantastic effects of science fiction, especially in terms of sex, romance, and love." Noto was inspired by the films and directors of the French New Wave and the brilliant recent generation of European filmmakers like Federico Fellini and Michelangelo Antonioni. She eschewed the traditional three-act structure and other Hollywood screenwriting conventions in favor of something more wild, more experimental. And of course, as we all know, there's nothing Hollywood studios love more than experimental. At first, things progressed smoothly. Her script fell under the personal supervision of Sean Daniel, and she felt it was in good hands. Daniel would edit the script one 50-page chunk at a time, as they were sent to him fresh from Noto's typewriter. Unfortunately, about the time the first draft was finished, Daniel exited. Perhaps it was because he lost interest, finding that the script included more elements of science fiction than he expected, or he may have simply decided to focus on other projects he was currently developing. Once he left, the script was handed over to producer Renee Missel. Missel was familiar with the project and Noto's work as a writer, having previously optioned what she says was Noto's first script. It's unclear whether she means the female James Bond script or something else, but either way, she was already working with Noto on that project when she took over on The Tourist. Missel and her partner, Howard Rosenman, began working to further the film's development at Universal, and it wasn't long before they were shopping for a director. The script was quickly becoming a hot property, and filmmakers were already expressing interest. Noto remembers meeting with Ridley Scott to discuss the film when the director was briefly considering directing another project while attempting to put together Blade Runner, but eventually he passed. Missel wound up offering the job to Brian Gibson, a British filmmaker who had just recently made the move to LA. Gibson was enthusiastic about the script. He was drawn to its originality, its pessimism and dark film noir tone, but quickly began to perceive a clash between the story's art house sensibilities and Universal Studios' ambitions to turn it into something more mainstream. For those very reasons, the project stalled. The script's deviantly sexual tone and copious amounts of nudity were considered a hazard under the conservative attitudes of the time, and Universal put the script in turnaround, which basically means that other studios have the opportunity to buy it. What happened next is the subject of some contention. According to one source I consulted, Noto had a rare clause in her contract with Universal that gave her a year-long option on the script if the original production failed. Having not enjoyed her time working with Missel, she wound up taking it to Francis Ford Coppola's newly renovated independent studio, American Zoetrope. This came as a surprise to Missile, who recalled the option on the turnaround being in both of their names. So while she was trying to sell the script to United Artists, she heard about Noto's American Zoetrope deal, made without her approval or involvement, and felt their contract had been violated. For the time being, at least, Noto believed the project had been given a new lease on life, and a new director, Frank Rodham. Rodham, like most British directors of his generation, had begun his career in television before making the move to cinema. He had enjoyed enormous critical and commercial success with his debut film Quadrophenia, based on the Who album of the same name, and had subsequently signed a 3-picture deal with 20th Century Fox. He had planned to make his first Hollywood feature a personal passion project called Rainforest, which would have tackled the destruction of the Amazon. Rodham spent 6 months researching the film in South America, and a further 18 months simply attempting to convince Robert Redford to take the lead role. When he finally demanded a firm answer from the reluctant star, Redford passed, and Rainforest fell apart. Later, in the spring of 1981, Rodham happened to be playing tennis one day with his friends and fellow directors Adrian Lyne and Brian Gibson, when Gibson happened to mention The Tourist. Next thing Rodham knew, he was meeting with the film's new producer, Michael Schamberg, and agreeing to join the production, something which took his old friend Gibson by surprise. Noto immediately clicked with the director, and the two set to work rewriting the script, quickly coming up with a new draft with which they were both satisfied. I believe the draft that can be found online, which is dated 1981, might be this revised draft, but I'm not sure. At Zoetrope, The Tourist was yet another impressive production added to the prospective lineup. Coppola envisioned his studio, recently revamped with huge shooting stages and the latest filmmaking technology, as a haven for artists. He would provide the resources normally only available at major studios, coupled with the freedom and auteur sensibilities of a much smaller company. He had already helped Akira Kurosawa make Kagemusha, and Jean-Luc Godard make Every Man for Himself. Now, David Lynch was prepping Ronnie Rocket, and legends like Gene Kelly and Michael Powell were setting up big new films. But, as Frank Rodham put it, what was supposed to be heaven turned out to be pure hell. As Rodham continued developing The Tourist, it became apparent the studio was plagued with a crippling lack of money. Coppola was busy funneling every cent into his latest and most out-of-control production since Apocalypse Now, a stylized romantic musical called One from the Heart. Rodham and Noto struggled for 8 long months to assemble whatever aspects of the production they could, meeting with art directors and nearly every major actress of the time. Among the names considered were Kim Basinger, Hazel O'Connor, Teresa Russell, Sharon Stone, Michelle Pfeiffer, Kathleen Turner, Jessica Lange, and Madonna. Noto's initial choice for the lead was German actress Hanna Schigula, a regular in the films of volatile German director Rainer Werner Fassbinder. But after meeting personally with her, Noto felt that Schigula lacked the mysterious quality she wanted for the character. Soon these meetings proved utterly futile, as Rodham realized there was no money to use for hiring anybody. He remembers the desperation he and other filmmakers felt languishing at Zoetrope, claiming that all of their efforts to secure funds or payment from Coppola or his employees were met with rude dismissal. Michael Powell even resorted to reusing sets from One from the Heart in a last-ditch attempt to get his own film off the ground. Frustration finally got the better of Rodham and Noto, so they decided to shop The Tourist around at another studio. After securing some meetings, including one with Italian mega producer Dino De Laurentiis, who would later purchase the rights to Lynch's Ronnie Rocket, their efforts hit a roadblock. First off, Rodham claims that Coppola was demanding a fee. Since his studio still owned an option on the script, they would not let it go without being bought out first. It seemed like they might be able to wait this problem out, since Zoetrope's option was soon due to expire expire, and they did not expect the studio would be able to afford the $150,000 renewal fee. But it was just then that Missile informed them of their legal issue. Claiming joint ownership of the project's initial turnaround, she filed a lawsuit that nixed any plans of taking the film to another studio. Rodham moved on to other films. Zoetrope went bankrupt after the release of One from the Heart, their option on the script expired, and The Tourist wound up back with Universal Studios. Renee Missile, having regained control of the project, brought back director Brian Gibson and continued developing the film, this time joined by the project's original producer, Sean Daniel, who decided to step back on board. Missile, Daniel, and Gibson were all none too eager to continue working with Noto. Missile felt betrayed by Noto's alleged violation of her contract, Daniel is said to have felt the writer was too difficult, and Gibson discovered that any suggestion he had for the script was angrily dismissed by the temperamental scribe. Feeling the writer had lost perspective and could no longer view her work objectively, Missile made the decision to pursue other writers. Clair Noto was gone. Noto, however, remembers her dismissal differently. She felt that her position as the writer, from the very beginning, had not been respected at all, and that Missile and Gibson were frequently mistreating her, insulting her, and belittling her script. She believed that Missile, in particular, had some kind of personal vendetta against her, and soon after the project returned to Universal, she was fired. With Noto gone, the long and arduous process of finding another writer to reinterpret the script began. Many famous names are said to have tried their hand, including Alien screenwriter Dan O'Bannon and science fiction author Harlan Ellison. There was more pressure from Universal to lighten the tone of the film, to make it more accessible. To this end, Missile and Gibson hired Patricia Knopp, who would go on to pen erotic dramas like 9.5 Weeks and Wild Orchid. Knopp, who says she attempted to retain as much of the uniqueness of Noto's story as possible, delivered a new draft of the script sometime in 1982, and Gibson, Missile, Daniel, and even the executives at Universal Studios were said to be extremely happy with it. The film seemed just on the verge of getting a green light. To give it that last needed incentive, Gibson hired Swiss surrealist H.R. Giger to create some conceptual art. Giger, already considered one of the most original and visionary artists of the 20th century, had first made a splash in the art world in 1977 with the publication of his book of artwork, Necronomicon. It was this book that inspired Ridley Scott to hire Giger to design the eponymous creature of his 1979 sci-fi horror film, Alien. And even before that, Alejandro Jodorowsky had hired Giger to design the Harkonnen homeworld for his failed adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune. Giger had won an Oscar for his work on Alien, but despite the acclaim, his designs would rarely be used on the films he would work on subsequently, often being considered either too extreme or too expensive. The Tourist seemed different. Not only was it his first film project after Alien, the story felt tailor-made for his sensibilities and quickly sparked his singular imagination. He would create several conceptual drawings of extraterrestrials and interior designs of the corridor for the production, which would be used to help sell the movie. These drawings, which can be found online, are stunning. Each one positively oozes with his distinctive brand of nightmarish grotesqueness and erotic beauty. Noto never got to see any of this artwork herself until a few pieces were published in a May 1988 issue of Cinefantastique. She admits she was surprised by what she saw, and failed to recognize what parts of the script were supposed to be portrayed in the drawings, likely because the designs were overseen by Gibson and created from a later draft written without her involvement. Noto also claims that it was her idea, from early on, to bring in Giger. Her initial concept was that several different designers could be hired to create different races of aliens, with each artist bringing their own specific sensibilities to each design, allowing every alien to look like a truly unique organism, similar to the cantina scene in Star Wars. Knopp continued revising the script in collaboration with Brian Gibson, and the team prepared to present the film to Universal's then film division president, Ned Tannen, for the official green light. It's rumored they were so confident at their chances that work had even begun on the film's production design. So what finally killed it? We'll find out in part 3.